Really glad to have you here with us, Arte, and stage is yours. Looking forward to your presentation.
And thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone. So I'm Arte Merritt. Oh, where's the slide here? I'm Arte Merritt. I'm the founder of Econify. We're an analytics and optimization platform for Gen AI. I've been in the conversational AI space for about 10 years now, though. Previously, I was at AWS leading the Conversational AI Partner Program. And prior to that, I had a chatbot analytics platform that we grew to about 20,000 customers who processed about 90 billion messages. So Gen AI is obviously one of the hottest topics right now in conversational AI. When we were here last year, there was a bit of hesitation around Gen AI, but now we're seeing rapid adoption, not just in the platforms that are building conversational AI, but the enterprises themselves. There's really broad use case appeal across different industries, but within customer service itself. It's not just for chatbots, but for agent assist and call summarization. It's leading to improved response handling and then new methodologies for implementing conversational AI. So with it comes new challenges. So where we went from NLU, where we had unstructured data going in, but structured responses going back. Now you have unstructured on both sides. There's the hallucinations and accuracy issues that we're all familiar with. For enterprises, data privacy, cost, and latency are key concerns and challenges to overcome. And there's multiple providers and models to choose from. It seems like there's new ones nearly every day. So these are some of the challenges we'll get into. But we have to remember the reason why we're implementing conversational AI, it really comes down to customer satisfaction. Being available 24/7 on channels users prefer to interact. So we ran a survey about a year ago where we found 90% of people would do repeat business with a company if they had a positive customer experience. 70% would actually pay more for a product from a company that offered exceptional customer service, and then 64% would stop doing business after just one bad experience. When we dove deeper into that survey, we found that accuracy, understanding, and the speed of response were the most important issues for consumers, whether they were talking to a live agent or an automated solution. And if you dived a little bit deeper into it, the ability to understand was the most critically important from consumers. And this is where Gen AI can really help, because it can help improve the understanding, especially across more complex queries or multi-language queries. It leads to more accurate responses, and it also helps speed up that response, especially when you don't have to do the hit fallbacks. But as we remember, conversational AI is really an iterative process. There's all the model creation and maintenance. There's the conversation flows, back-end integrations, and the testing, monitoring, and measurement in this iterative flow. So I'm really bullish on Gen AI. I really think it'll replace NLU. But where we're at right now is still folks taking more of that hybrid approach. And there's different ways to do that hybrid. Some are maybe a little bit more in the baby steps where you're using Gen AI to help build your NLU models or to help augment the NLU models with additional training phrases. And then some folks start to move into using it for fallback handling or even for orchestration. So with orchestration, you can help disambiguate intents, like in this example, where you could have a banking chatbot, and if someone went in and said, I want to open an account, well, is that a personal banking account or a commercial banking account? You can help disambiguate that. You don't have to use Gen AI to respond directly to the user. You can use it for intent and entity recognition and respond in code, and then you still have full control over what the response is. So this can help alleviate some of the concerns folks have with Gen AI responding. But you can go all in on Gen AI, and there are folks doing that. There's the Klarna example. I've seen a few examples at the event here from the University of Edinburgh and the Bridget case. If you do go all in on this, this is where you really want to have your guardrails in place, and we'll get into some of that in a little bit. But when it comes to choosing a model, these are some of the key factors. So accuracy is obviously an issue. One of my friends that's here at the event, his go-to prompt to test different models is to say, spell lollipop backwards. And if you try this after, it's kind of funny because almost all of them get it wrong. And there was one in particular, I remember it said, to spell lollipop backwards. And it starts going through the letters, and they're all completely different letters, and it wasn't involving lollipop backwards. And then it said, and then you end up with a result, and that also was wrong. So they got it wrong twice in the same response. But data privacy, that's paramount for enterprises. Who has access to the data? How is it being used? Is it becoming part of the model? I hosted a panel a couple months ago where we had a partner from Cooley, the law firm, and she said, you basically have to operate on the assumption that your data will be used. Unless the terms of service for the model say otherwise, the data is most likely being used, and that's why folks are using like the Azure instance of OpenAI. When it comes to cost, you see these models priced at 1,000th of a cent or 10,000th of a cent per token, and folks don't really know what tokens are. And the costs seem cheap at first, but they really start to add up, especially if you're doing prompt engineering and adding a lot more prompts in. And latency is also a concern too. How fast are these models responding? So this is my go-to prompt when I'm testing different models. Tell me a cat joke. And these are some of the responses from a whole slew of different models up there. But you might notice while there are different ones, there are a few that start to be the same, where it's, why don't cats play poker in the jungle? Because they're afraid of cheetahs. In fact, if we look at the semantic similarity, you can see that OpenAI and Perplexity are 90% and nearly 92% similar to the Anthropic response. And this will be important to consider when we start talking about cost. And then there's a whole cluster around OpenAI, Perplexity, and Mistral, where they're all well over 80% similar to each other. And then when we look at the tokens, so tokens are the factor in the cost. It was the same exact prompt sent to all these models, but the different token counts, it's not apples to apples when comparing the models, because each of them treats tokens differently. Like sometimes you use a rule of thumb that it's about 4 characters, but it really depends on how the model is stubbing out words and subwords and handling punctuation and all that. Obviously, the completion tokens are different because the responses are different lengths. But when it comes to cost and latency, there's quite a bit of variation here. If we remember back with the semantic similarity, where Perplexity was nearly 92% similar to Anthropic, well, here it's a fraction of the cost, and it's a heck of a lot faster. So it could be, in this case, using this model might be a better choice. So if you're doing cat jokes, Perplexity is maybe better than Anthropic. But whatever model you choose, you really want to customize this for your particular use case. And we've seen folks at the event talk about this. There's obviously prompt engineering. This is a little bit more of the experimentation, providing guides to the model. It definitely does add to the token amount, which increases your cost. There's a RAG approach where you can sort of limit to a particular content, providing external documentation to focus on. And then there's the fine-tuned model, which is a bit more advanced. We can get really higher accuracy within a particular domain. So when you choose in between these, like a RAG approach would allow you to have like a broader context and have that fixed content, whereas a fine-tuned model allows you to go a little bit deeper into the accuracy. It can be a little bit more expensive initially, but long-term it's cheaper because you don't have to have all the prompts in there to guide folks, or guide the model, sorry. And whichever approach you take, you definitely want to add guardrails so you can prevent either unwanted or inappropriate prompts going in, as well as the responses going out. So it's on both sides to have the guardrails. You could perhaps do some of this yourself if you want with like regular expressions or like the semantic matching, but there are third-party tools out there that do this for you, and some of the models have some built-in flags too that you can leverage. So one of the questions that often comes up in this space is whether conversation designers are still needed, and conversation design is still important. There's still key best practices to follow. I'll just cover a few of those real quick, and then we'll talk about the new analytics. So it's still very important to educate folks during onboarding, letting them know what the chatbot can do. And you might want to include things like quick replies around some of the more common things folks can do, but it's really important to allow people to type or speak in free form. In the survey that I ran, we found 83% of folks really wanted that ability, so you want to give them that opportunity to write or speak in free form. And that's why Gen AI is so much better here, because it can better understand those utterances. Context and personalization are key. The more information you know about someone, the less you have to ask. If I was to call the airline right now, it's going to say, "Hi, Arte, you're calling about the flight to San Francisco." It knows who I am and what I'm most likely calling about. Failing gracefully is still very important here. You want to help get the people back on the happy path. If you're using Gen AI as your primary model for figuring out the intents, if the Gen AI can't figure out something, it's best to say you can't figure it out rather than provide some inaccurate response. And there's some different approaches to using Gen AI. If NLU is your primary approach, then you can have Gen AI for fallback handling. So the first is just having it to figure out the intent better and see if it matches maybe some of your other training phrases or existing intents. Or you can have Gen AI just respond directly to the user. This works a little bit better when you have those customized models using RAG or the heavily prompt engineered. If you do this approach, it's helpful to prompt or ask the user after whether that was helpful or not, and we'll use that in the analytics. It's also very important to provide a means to escalate. We found in the survey nearly 70% of people, this is what was most important to them. You can optimize for 100% containment, but that's just by never escalating people, but that's just a really horrible customer experience. Chatbots and voice assistants give a great way to reinforce your brand. There's a bit of a fine line with doing this. There's a popular banking chatbot in the US where if you asked it, "What's the weather?" it'll say, "It's always sunny," when you're talking about your finances. You really want to have a guide if you're doing this. And now if you're doing Gen AI first, then that should be part of the prompts that you're sending in to help guide what the personality should be. The same with being accessible and empathetic. It's really about the power of words and building trust. So if you're using Gen AI first, you want to make sure you have prompts in there that help guide the responses back. So let's get into the monitoring and measurement. So as we move away from NLU, there's new analytics that we can actually look at to improve the models. So with traditional sort of NLU, one of the big things is just seeing the mishandled and unhandled intents. And there's a way to do that where you do semantic clustering around the utterances, and now it starts to group them together. Like in this case, there's all these utterances around checking an order, and we can see sometimes it goes to the proper intent, sometimes it goes to the wrong intent, sometimes it hits the fallback, and you can use that to update your model. But as we move away from that, with Gen AI, you lose maybe that concept of intents, but you can still do that same clustering, and it basically gives you the intent back. So if we start clustering the messages, now we see there's two different intents here around checking an order status, getting the store hours. You can apply your own taxonomy to this so you have more of a true intent. And then you can start to compare the responses around these prompt clusters. In fact, what's really cool is you can cluster the actual responses. So when we're going from having unstructured data going in and structured response going out, and now it's unstructured on both sides, this gives you a little bit of that structure back, because now you have effectively like an outbound intent. And you can start to compare the responses across prompt clusters. So in this case, there's more than one prompt that's generating these responses that are similar to each other. So you can use this for updating your model, whether it's RAG or fine-tuning. It gives you a bit of a qualitative feedback, but if you want the quantitative feedback to update, that's when, as mentioned earlier, you want to prompt the users, was that helpful or not? Did that answer your question? You know, thumbs up, thumbs down, some sort of rating. And now you can start using that data and looking at the responses that were lower rated and see how you can improve the model around those. Transcripts still provide a wealth of information. Like in this case here, we can see the person's getting frustrated. The chatbot's not understanding them. That's why they asked to escalate. So folks still like to see this. And both analytics platform we had, this ends up being one of the #1 things, just diving into the transcripts. But the beauty of Gen AI now is you can use it to summarize the transcript, so you don't have to go into each individual transcript, and then you can just bubble up the anomalies. Like, what's a different transcript from all the others? So I can go in and just look at those. So I was talking about earlier, cost and latency and tokens. These are all things to keep track of. The tokens obviously factor into the cost. But here you want to keep track of, so if you see the tokens, then you might want to change some of your prompts a bit, especially doing heavy prompt engineering, make them a bit more concise to reduce the token counts. but you might want to look at other models. If you go back to the semantic similarity, how they're responding, if there's ones that are similar that are maybe faster and cheaper, it's something to keep in mind. And then inevitably, we're building these solutions to help achieve some sort of goal, whether that is containment or getting jobs done or getting a person past where they're stuck. It's really important to check those flows, see if folks are making it through, and if not, go back and make changes. And as we mentioned, this is an iterative process, so whatever you get back from the analytics, you want to feed that back in to how you're doing your customized models, how you're doing the flows, just to improve that overall customer experience. And that's it for me. So I'm Arte Merritt. You can find me on LinkedIn, or my company is Reconify.com.
Thank you very much, Arte. Very nice presentation.
Thanks.
A lot of insights, very nicely presented. So it was very nice slides. You could easily follow you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Do we have questions from the audience? If not, I will kick it off with one. At some point, you were talking about that in the age of Gen AI, it's really important to also give that option of an open talk. I'm sometimes thinking it might even make sense that we move away even from these quick replies. I know there's a case for them in terms of people very quickly being able to give an answer, right? But sometimes I have a feeling it takes them a little bit out of that mindset of, hey, this is really one of these more modern AI assistants that can really, interact with me. And they are in the mindset, they're a little bit, this is one of these old bots that, What do you think about that?
Yeah, so what we found from the analytics, you have to have a good mixture. So the mixture was about 34% or so buttons versus free form was kind of like the standard, and if you went over a standard deviation above that or below that, that's when you saw engagement really drop off. So sorry, for good engagement, having a mix like that. But before with NLU, you really, because often it would get things wrong, that's part of the reason to have the quick replies. But I think now with Gen AI, you can start to move away from that because you can understand those more complex queries. You can understand when people are mixing languages together, whether it's a Singlish or any of these kind of things, you can start to pick that up. So that's why we found in that survey before, it's such a high percentage of folks want that ability to speak freely that I think given that opportunity is definitely important.
Perfect,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other question on the floor? Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So 2 hands, let's start here. And coming to you in a minute.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering, I think you mentioned looking at transcripts and trying to look at summaries from, having generated summaries from transcripts. Is there anything you're specifically asking to see in that summary when you're trying to get, generated summaries?
Yeah, well, first you can summary. The whole transcript's going to have the back and forth chat, so you can do summaries just on an individual transcript. So it was about X, right? This is what the person is trying to do. Part of that is having the sentiment too, so you can see overall the sentiment of this transcript was negative 0.5 or something. It was a bad one, or it was closer to 1, or it was positive. So that's what you can do in the individual transcript, but then you can start to look across all the transcripts to see if there's any differences. Those anomaly ones where some interaction occurred that was outside the normal, and then dive into those to see why that was. One of the customers they went primarily after the sentiment, why was there negative sentiment on that transcript, to dive a little bit deeper, to get a better idea of the context, that back and forth. Yeah.
Thank you. We had one more question here.
Hi, thank you very much. Many subtopics in this one, but I wonder about this process of building personality. How would you go about that? Is personality enough to invoke trust?
Yeah, all these start to go hand in hand, the personality as well as being empathetic and accessible. We found in the analytics that chatbots that had some form of personality tended to have higher engagement, but folks can overdo it. That's why in the past, you used to hear folks talking about employing like comedians or screenwriters that knew the timing and all. But now as you start to move to Gen AI, it's really adding prompts in to help convey whatever personality it is that you want. And you also need to incorporate some that convey the type of empathy, like the presentation we just saw right before this, or even Mike was yesterday talking about some of these additional prompts that help set the tone to be more empathetic. And that whole prompt engineering is a bit of that experimentation, so you kind of have to experiment a bit based on what type of personality you want to have, or you want the chatbot to have, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
We'd have time for one more.
Thank you for the presentation. So you mentioned that you have a long experience with monitoring and evaluating classical chatbots. Moving now to generative AI chatbots, what do you think will be the key differentiation in the way how we will be monitoring and evaluating these bots?
Yeah, so there's new numeric metrics to track, like some of the ones I was mentioning, the token counts, the cost and latency. But then there's the actual, for figuring out response effectiveness, that's where, at least for what we're doing, is clustering the prompts and clustering those responses. So you can start to see how the impact different prompts have on the responses. And some of that, as was mentioned, it's a little bit qualitative, like was that a good response or not? But if you prompt the users after a response, was that helpful? Did that answer your question? Then you start to get real metrics around it so you can have a more quantitative feedback to improve the model. So I think that's a big thing now is getting that feedback loop in place so you can actually update your model however you're doing it. If it is heavy prompt engineering, if it's RAG, it's fine tuning. Just so you can feed that back in.
One more round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.